session, so my goal is to get done at least 10 or 15 minutes early. So, what I want to talk to you a little bit about today is emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence, leadership authenticity. I can't tell you how important that is for your career. Whether or not you are working for somebody, whether you decide to get in business, your relationships, at home, in other organizations. As we go through the elements of emotional intelligence, I want you to think about great leaders that you may know. I'm not talking about, Douglas MacArthur or a president. I want to, think about people in your lives that you're close to, that you think are really good leaders. And then think about the qualities as we go through some of those. And ask yourself the question, do they have those? And my guess is you will answer that they do. So some people have emotional intelligence. This is all based on a book written by Daniel Goldman. I don't know if you've ever heard that. He's one of my favorite authors. If you've never read that book, pick it up sometime. It's a great read. It will help you in business. It will help you in life. It will help you with your relationships. So, today we're going to discuss basically two types of intelligence. We're going to talk about the qualities of successful leaders. And again, think about leaders, not just necessarily in your business, maybe in your church, in some volunteer organization. Think about them as we go through this. The qualities of successful leaders, and then 5 components of emotional intelligence, which is an acronym EI. We all know about IQ. EI, again, is the acronym for emotional intelligence. And then near the end, we're going to connect emotional intelligence and leader authenticity. Okay? And we'll define exactly what that means. I think that will become evident as we kind of go through the slides. So, really, when we think or when we reason, there's really 2 types of thinking. When we're in a supervisor mode, we use deductive reasoning. We tackle a problem, we look at the details, we don't necessarily look at the big picture. You're working on the assignment, you have a project plan, and you work to that plan. Okay? Then there's another type of thinking. When you are in a leadership role, you actually use inductive reasoning. And what is inductive reasoning? It's the ability to see how things will look. That visionary look when a goal is achieved, but you may not always be sure how to get there. You start at the end because you have that vision, not at the beginning, like you do when you're using deductive reasoning. How many people have ever read Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People? Again, that's one of my favorite books. I read that book back in 1995 and 96 as a part of a business group at Mercury Marine. Just to give you a little bit of a background, I was at Mercury Marine for 28 and a half years. Most of my career was in human resources. I started out in finance, worked in human resources, and moved to human resources. And went through all of the disciplines in HR. I did compensation, salary administration. I did all the benefit plans, including health care, pension, all that kind of stuff. Did recruitment, and then moved out into the plant 15 along Highway 41 there, the big one, that was my plant. Did union negotiations, just when I thought I saw it all. I realized I didn't see it all. So that was an eye-opening experience, and then moved back into a corporate role where I was the director of global human resources. So I had like 7 international locations reporting to me, including China, Latin America, Europe, all those. So I did some traveling. So that emotional intelligence, came into play in every single position. If you have never read Stephen Covey's book, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Again, it's a great read. It will change your life. It will change the way you think about your relationships. And finally, inductive reasoning is really driven by, as I said, a vision of the future. What can we be? How can we get better? You may not necessarily be sure, you may not have the answer to that question, but if you're a good leader, you don't necessarily need to know because you can find people that will help you. So, there's 2 types of reasoning, so which one is best? Organizations, teams actually need both types of reasoning to succeed. If you're ever on a team and you have a bunch of big picture guys, guess what? You go nowhere. If you're ever on a team and you have a bunch of people who are just very focused on the job or using deductive reasoning, usually conflict develops and you kind of tread water also. So the types often clash in organizations. So look at the word bosses. We all have bosses in various parts of our life. So bosses get people to do what they want. We can all follow orders. The military is a great example, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. There's a need to have bosses in certain situations. Leaders get people to want what they want. Again, you're starting at the end. So a good leader communicates that vision, it gets people focused on that vision, and then they become energized by that vision, and they get there. An organization, no matter how big or how small, that is composed exclusively of just one of those types, or both of those, will collapse. Okay? So it's important as you put teams together, as you interact with other people, that you look for people that are big picture and also deductive reasoners. Okay? So leader qualities. First question, are leaders born or are they made? Anybody have any thoughts? What do you think? Made?
Both.
Yeah.
Okay. University research has actually been conducted on this, and you're right. Some people are natural born leaders. We kind of look at them, but really they have grown up and have been influenced by leaders, before them. So leaders can be made, but is everybody in your organization a leader? Are the leaders in the right positions? I can tell you from my experience at Mercury, that was probably the biggest struggle from an HR standpoint, was getting leaders in the right positions. So what are the unique characteristics of a leader? Who is a great leader? And again, I want you to think about people that are close to you. Not the president, not people that you admire. I'm talking about people that you deal with on a day-to-day basis in your organization, in your company, maybe in your church. Okay? And what are the characteristics that would lend themselves and you can learn from? So we're just going to dive into a little bit to those. Oops. Again, this is based on Daniel Goleman's bestseller book called Emotional Intelligence. If you've never read it, pick it up. It is a great read. It will help you in everything you do, from your relationships with your friends, maybe your spouse, to your relationships at work and other organizations that you participate in. It has changed the concept of being smart. We've always thought of people being smart, and the measure of being smart is being IQ. We always talk about somebody has a high IQ. Well, EI is actually also very important, and at the most basic level, what EI is the ability to accurately identify and understand your own emotional reactions and reactions of others. So EI begins with really knowing yourself. Once you know yourself, you can begin to identify the emotional reactions of others. And we all have emotions every single day, in just about every single relationship. So how we handle ourselves and our relationships can determine our success in more than one aspect of life. Stellar career performance in any setting also performs in EI. When I was at Mercury, when I hired, you hear the old acronym, hire for attitude. Attitude is emotional intelligence. If you get somebody who's emotionally intelligent, I will take somebody with a 2.0 grade point average that has high emotional intelligence, if I get them in the right position, over somebody that's got a 4.0 and doesn't have it. Because I can give you tons of examples of times where we took engineers who had doctorate degrees, were some of the smartest people I knew, but you put them in a managerial position and they failed because they didn't have emotional intelligence. So, what makes a great leader? Obviously, you have to have intellect and you have to have some technical skills. But then, emotional intelligence, how you deal with others, just about everybody here in whatever capacity you're working in, you deal with other people. The days of the old accountant or IT person who just sat behind a computer all day, we used to have those back in the 70s and 80s. That's not the way that business is done anymore. So, we're going to talk a little bit about emotional intelligence. So, how can you tell if somebody has emotional intelligence? Well, the best way is to observe how they manage, one, themselves. As we said, emotional intelligence begins with knowing yourself. And then how they manage their relationships with others. Okay? So, really there's 5 components to consider. The 5 key components of emotional intelligence, and we begin again with yourself. One is self-awareness. How are you, where do you fall on that emotional intelligence? Self-regulation, another word is maybe discipline, and self-motivation. So those are 3 key self-management skills. If you're not self-aware, if you cannot self-regulate or have the discipline, if you are not motivated, no matter how smart you are, think about how successful that person is going to be. So then the other components of emotional intelligence are empathy. Now, empathy is one of those words, it's one of those big words, it's kind of hard to understand. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then your social skills. So relationships with others. So those are the components of EI. Okay. An observation, the higher the rank of an individual considered to be a star performer in any organization, and this was particularly true at Mercury, was the more emotional intelligence capabilities show up as the reason for his or her effectiveness. The most effective directors, managers that we have were people that were very self-aware and had high empathy for their team. Like I said, we promoted tons of very technical people, never taught them how to manage, never taught them how to empathize with their team, and their team ultimately collapsed or began to fail. And that was our fault. It wasn't necessarily the person's. So a person with self-awareness has a deep understanding of their own emotions, strengths, weaknesses, needs, and drives. Strengths and weaknesses, those are one of those things in the HR world we like to ask people, do you know what your strength is? Do you know what your weakness is? And if you're ever in an interview, you want to take your weakness and kind of make it into a strength. Well, this is really a look at yourself when you really know what your strengths are. We cannot be everything to everybody. And if you try, you are going to be something we're going to talk about a little bit later, inauthentic. It's easy to recognize. Okay? A person with self-awareness is neither overly critical or unrealistically hopeful. Okay? They're honest with their self and they're honest with others. They extend to a person's understanding of his or her own values or goals. We all have values, we all have goals. So the extension of the values need to become an extension of who you are, knowing who you are and how you act and how you behave all the time. I'm sure you probably know people like that. It's often exhibited as candor and the ability to assess oneself realistically. So, one of the hallmarks of self-awareness is the ability to use self-depreciating humor. I mean, if you ever see somebody who is kind of critical of themselves and can laugh at themselves, that's a quality of somebody who really pretty much knows themselves. They don't take themselves too seriously. It's a deeply embedded desire to achieve for the sake of achievement. There is personal satisfaction in doing a job right. They're highly motivated people, and they're optimistic.
You want to go back a screen?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, you saw the skip one.
Whoop. Did I miss one?
Oh,
Yeah, you keep going back, because you were still in self-awareness.
there we go.
There you go.
Okay.
You're on your second one.
Okay, sorry about that. Self-aware people are recognizable by their visible self-confidence. They have a firm grasp of their capabilities. Again, they're honest with themselves. They're less likely to set themselves up for failure, and also less likely to set their team up for failure. Have you ever been in a situation where you feel like you're going to fail and that's the boss's fault, that they're setting you up for failure? Well, if you haven't, someday you may. People with self-awareness assess themselves honestly and thus are suited to do the same for the people within their organization. You don't necessarily have to have people reporting to be an influencer. Okay? So, self-regulation, again, is one of the key components. It's the ability to control your emotions, when you get mad, when you get angry, so that it does not begin to overshadow the issue that you're dealing with. Typically, if you let your emotions get too out of hand, if you're dealing with a very emotional issue, you raise the emotional bar and the person will raise it next to you. Before you know it, you're arguing. Sometimes it happens at home with my spouse, so try not to do that. People in control of their feelings and impulses are able to create an environment of trust and fairness. We all talk about those things, and they're huge words, but as a person, as a manager, as a leader, it's something you can actually create with the people that you deal with. Those who have mastered their emotions can roll with change. And change is difficult. That's what I do for a living now. I'm a business coach, so what I do is help people change their business. The hard part of making change is making the change. And sometimes it takes a lot of work to really do things that seem really simple. Okay? Self-regulation enhances a person's integrity. It's not just a personal virtue, but it's also a strength of an organization. Signs of emotional self-regulation are a propensity for reflection and thoughtfulness. I'm going to just pause there and think about that, because there's a lot of times in the whirlwind of doing our jobs each and every day, we don't take time to reflect on what the other person is thinking or what the other person is actually doing. Okay? They're comfortable with ambiguity and change. We talked about that. And they have an integrity, the ability to say no to impulsive urges. One of the problems I had earlier in my career is I had a propensity to never say no. And then your plate becomes overloaded. And then that becomes a reflection on your performance. So you learn sometimes to know what you're really good at and then direct or take those kinds of projects. And then extreme displays of negative emotion never have emerged as a driver of good leadership. Blow-ups. You ever known somebody who is like a Sherman tank? You know, they just kind of roll over everybody. Think about the reaction of their team. If they are such a micromanager that they are managing everything, people then stop to think. They don't think it. And you have an organization where people are afraid to do things. So, self-motivation, again, what is that? It's a drive to achieve beyond expectation, not only of you, but others that you are around, whether they report to you or not. It's a deeply embedded desire to achieve for the sake of achievement. And I guess this is where I was before when okay. So there is personal satisfaction in getting the job right. They're highly motivated, they remain optimistic, and their glass is actually, they always look at the world, everything, as a glass is half full, instead of looking at it from the negative, well, it's half empty. So they're very optimistic. Achievement motivated people, they show commitment to their organization, to their people, to their crew. So, those motivated by the desire to achieve versus to gain external rewards. Okay? So, when I was at Mercury, one of the things that I kind of prided myself on was if I was working on a project, I mean, we had some managers, directors, believe it or not, that would take your ideas and tell them that it was yours, that were theirs. I mean, I didn't really care. At the end of the day, what was really important for Mercury is that those ideas became reality. So if I could convince them to move forward, and the idea was theirs, who cares? They move forward and move the organization forward. So they display a passion for the work itself. They seek out creative challenges. They love to learn new stuff. They're always going to seminars, reading books, whatever. They take pride in the job well done. They display an unflagging energy to do things better, always. And they don't accept the status quo. Persistently question why things are done. We used to ask that question all the time. Why did we do this? And the answer I always hated was, well, because we've always done it. Things never move forward when we get that answer. And they're forever raising the bar, and they actually like keeping score. So one of the things we struggle with is trying to measure success, but there's always a way to measure it. Sometimes you gotta get a little creative, but measurements are what keep you on track. It's really easy to get distracted, especially as projects become complex. So now we're going to talk a little bit about empathy. That's a big word. People with empathy, they understand themselves, remember the self-regulation, and they're able to put themselves in the other person's position. So empathy is really about meeting you where you are. I know where I am, now I can meet you as a person where you are, and then we can compromise, or we can talk, we can discuss, we can solve. It doesn't mean you're adapting to somebody else's emotions just to make them happy. It means understanding. And understanding and appreciating others' perspectives. Okay? We had a director of manufacturing They came in at the right time, and he was a micromanager. And we needed him because he needed to put the manufacturing processes back in order. But after he got that done, we made the mistake of promoting him to director of all manufacturing. And he tried to use the same tactic. And it began to fail because his team got larger and the team couldn't think. And then we had to start working with him to actually make him understand, because he was the micromanager. We had to make him work with him, sit in meetings with him and say, you know, if you would have done this, if you would have sat back and not answered the question, if you would have asked the question and let your team give you the answer, and then your team becomes more motivated. Okay? So it's all about, empathy is all about meeting people and understanding where they are in a particular situation. And then you know where you are, and then you can come together. Making him influencing without authority. That's a key skill. If you can influence without authority, you will be successful. Can you go again? Okay. I'm going. I always hit this thing the wrong way. Okay. That's where we were, right? Okay. People with empathy are very much attuned to body language. You ever sit in a meeting and you can kind of tell when somebody disagrees with you? Okay? So those are the ones where you're attuned to that and you ask the question, I can see there's something there that bothers you about this. A good leader will ask them to kind of, ask them, not tell them, ask them to bring that forward. They have a deep understanding of the existence and importance of cultural and ethnic differences. This is something we don't often think about. You may not often think about it, but I can tell you we have different generations. You probably read, you know, about Generation X and the baby boomers and all that. Well, when you throw all of those dynamics together, it creates conflict. And we all have these perceptions, these biases based on the world in which we live. When I started in business, there was no such thing as a cell phone. So we barely even had computers. And now there's a whole generation, my kids have never grown up without knowing what a computer can do. So that creates different dynamics. And now you have the millennials. And you're connected all the time. And now you have social networking things like Facebook, where people talk and connect. Okay? Talk and connect even when they're miles or countries apart. That was the kind of stuff that was never even possible. So that creates different dynamics. So knowing and understanding what those are and how they affect you and your organization, your workplace, that's emotional intelligence. Organizational awareness is the ability to read an organization's currents, build networks, and navigate politics. There's politics in every organization, large or small. And there's some people that are really good at navigating. They never seem to be on one side or the other, but everybody respects them. Those are the people with emotional intelligence. Okay, empathy factors. I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are things that we all have, perceptions, you know, where you came from. If you lived in California all your life versus somebody from Wisconsin, you have a different perception of work ethic, your past work history, your gender. We all have biases there. Abundance versus a scarcity outlook. That's going to be optimistic versus the pessimistic. But do you look at the world as a world of abundance, or do you look at the world as things are scarce? How do you trust? Some people I know are actually too trusting. Some people don't trust enough. So you got to know yourself where you are. Culture, ethnicity, that's huge in today's world. I mean, you could be dealing with people in China, Japan, totally different. I used to work with somebody in Japan, our manager, we tell him, this is what you want us to do, we want you to do, and he'd sit there at my desk and go, yep, I understand. Then he'd go back to Japan and he'd do the complete opposite. Why? I figured out finally that in Japan, it's in their culture to always agree with your superior. Always do this. So I had to refigure out how to communicate with him. So thinking, communication style, behavior patterns, personal info, marriage status, all those things. And when you think about it in the beginning, I told you a little bit about who I am, what I do. Think about that. Why do you do that? Because number one, it gives you something to talk about. We're talking one-on-one. Number two, if you're really listening, it tells you about some of these factors. You know I'm a baby boomer. You can probably tell that by the color of my hair. But that's why you do that. When you meet somebody out on a date, you kind of ask the same thing. Maybe somebody you've never met before. Well, you're gathering information, but you're also making perceptions about who they are. Okay? So talk a little bit about social skills. Those with good social skills display friendliness. They have a wide circle of acquaintances. You can usually recognize them. They have a knack for finding common ground. They don't look at the world as win-lose. One of Stephen Covey's habits are to think win-win. I think it was number 6. Think win-win. They have a knack for building rapport. They're adept managing teams, and they're experts on persuasion. They can get you to think like they think, but they usually don't do it by telling you what to think. Those with good social skills, they take charge, they inspire, they're good communicators, and they're good listeners. Listening is a skill. Most of us listen with the intent to respond. Listening with the intent to really listen and internalize is something you need to practice, and it's a discipline. If leading a department or a group, work is getting done through others. That's what you are as a manager. Social skills, how you deal with people, make that happen. So, an EI overview, again, your personal competence, self-awareness, self-management. It begins with you. Then you have your social competence, your social awareness, and that helps you manage your relationships. Okay, so, can emotional intelligence be learned? You think so? It's not a short process, though. And consider the concept of EI. Does it make sense to you? Do you agree with its basis? Do you agree it's out there? People are controlled by emotions? Read the book and find out about your own emotional. There are various tools out there that you can use. DISC is one. I use it all the time with business owners. There's the red, blue, green. I mean, they're all pretty much the same, but really know yourself. So now the other thing I want to do is try to connect the dots on emotional intelligence and talk about leadership authenticity. And again, this is based on 2 articles, Managing Authenticity, The Paradox of Great Leadership, and the authors are there. But we'll look and discuss at relationship of emotional intelligence and leadership authenticity. Anybody here know a leader who really isn't very authentic? Traits of an authentic leader, perceptions, and then how to become an authentic leader. So, relationships between EI and leadership authenticity, the higher EI skills, empathy and social skills, are strong with authentic leaders. If you think about the leaders now connecting, think about them. They have strong emotional intelligence. People want to be led by someone they feel is real. Have you ever been led by someone you think is kind of plastic? They're not really. People are dissatisfied with the sleek, the sick, the airbrush leaders with good PR. I could tell you some horror stories about those. You begin even to believe their own PR. And leaders and followers both associate authenticity with sincerity, honesty, and integrity. In dealing with difficult issues, I used to tell my managers, the one mistake you can't make is you have to be sincere. Whatever you say, whatever you do, you have to be sincere. So leadership authenticity must be attributed to you. It's defined as what others see in you. And to some extent, you can actually control what is seen. So you can control how, when, and to what you express your authentic self. Authenticity is not the product of manipulation, but great leaders know which personality traits they should reveal and when. A great leader doesn't always have to be a leader. Sometimes a great leader will take a lesser role in an organization and let somebody else lead. They manage perception. Leadership authenticity requires words consistent with deeds. Finding common ground with those who sought to be recruited as followers. You think win-win. Again, Stephen Covey's habit. Present different faces to different audiences. Again, they're very in tune, so an audience that they're connecting with differently, they don't always approach everything the same. They don't always have an autocratic approach. They will use an autocratic approach when necessary, but many times they won't. This kind of makes it sound like all the world's a stage. In a lot of ways, somebody who's very emotionally intelligent has leadership authenticity. They do know that. And they play to those emotions. They don't trick people. If they do, they're found out. But selective revealing of oneself, knowing when and what you're good at to reveal is very important. So know yourself and others. Over time and through life experiences, leaders develop an extensive repertoire of roles. We all play different roles in our life. Think about it. You're a spouse, you're a brother, you're a son, a daughter, you're a leader in your company, and you may be a manager, but we all have bosses, so then suddenly you become a managee. So you got to think about those roles. And using the complexity requires a degree of self-knowledge and a willingness and the ability to share that. And most authentic leaders don't realize they're actually engaged in self-expression and self-disclosure. They're hard to imitate. So how do authentic leaders acquire these attributes? Simplicity of goals. They keep people close to them who will give them honest feedback so they can use their skills to perform better themselves. We had a president at Mercury who was a very autocratic kind of leader. He didn't want to surround himself. He wanted people who were going to say yes, yes sir, yes sir, yes sir. Guess what happened? Eventually, we ended up going through one of the worst dips we ever had. So know yourself and know others. Great leaders are able to recognize which aspects of themselves and of their followers are looking for. You have to use your cognitive, and observational skills. People with great mobility in their early lives generally do better. Why? Because you've had a wider range of experiences. You've had to actually adapt to different cultures, to different locations. When I used to do relocation at Mercury, I always told people you got to make sure when you're moving from Wisconsin to Stillwater, Oklahoma, it's a tough move because you have to adapt to the new culture. The new culture isn't going to adapt to you. Challenge yourself to take experiences outside your own comfort zone. You were just here with Dale Carnegie. If you're not a good speaker, or you think you can't do it, challenge yourself, you can. There are people that can help you. Self-depreciation can work to show the knowledge of yourself and help establish rapport. Use where you came from. It's linked to your origin. Authentic leaders use personal histories, and they're comfortable in their own skin. They know who they are. We talked about that. Self-awareness, self-regulation. They never pretend to be something that they're not. So the messages conform, but only just enough. Pick aspects of yourself that reveal and to whom, reveal when, it's appropriate to use some of your skills. If you conform too much, you'll render yourself ineffective. Authentic leaders know how to strike and balance their skills. So they don't fake it, they make it. So, can emotional intelligence and leadership be taught? Yes. I mean, again, read the book. It's a great read. What about your leadership authenticity? Can it be taught? I think it can. So, good leaders' emotions are contagious, and leadership sincerity and honesty and trust. Just to kind of quickly review, and we're just about on time. EI, on the most basic level, is the ability to accurately identify and understand one's own emotional reactions, and then meet the other person where they are, and try and come together. Leadership authenticity relates to EI, empathy, and social skills. People want to be led by someone who is real or authentic. Okay? Any questions? Any thoughts? Okay.